August 1945. While American forces prepare to invade mainland Japan, Japanese military planners are working on something that sounds insane: an invasion of California. Not a raid, not a symbolic attack. An actual amphibious invasion force designed to land troops on American soil and hold territory. The plan was called Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, and on paper, it was suicide. Japan was losing the war badly. Their navy was destroyed, their air force decimated. They were being bombed daily and starved by submarine blockade. The idea of invading California seemed like desperate fantasy from officers who'd lost touch with reality. But when you actually examine the plan, something shocking emerges. It wasn't crazy. It was actually brilliant, tactically sound, strategically coherent. And if Japan had executed it earlier in the war, with the resources they once had, it might have worked. This is the story of Japan's plan to invade California. Not the propaganda version, not the dismissed fantasy, the actual operational plan that Japanese commanders developed, and why military historians today admit it was far more sophisticated than anyone expected. To understand why Japan would even consider invading California, you need to understand Japan's strategic problem in 1941. Japan needed resources: oil, rubber, iron, food. The home islands couldn't support the population or the military. Everything had to be imported. When America cut off oil exports in 1941, Japan had maybe 18 months of reserves. After that, the military would grind to a halt. Japan's solution was to seize the resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia: the Dutch East Indies for oil, Malaya for rubber and tin, French Indochina for rice. These conquests would make Japan self-sufficient. But there was a problem. America controlled the Philippines, sitting right in the middle of the planned conquest zone. America also had the Pacific Fleet based at Pearl Harbor, perfectly positioned to cut Japanese supply lines. Japan couldn't conquer Southeast Asia without neutralizing America first. The Pearl Harbor attack was supposed to solve this: destroy the Pacific Fleet. Give Japan 6 months to a year to consolidate their conquests. By the time America rebuilt and counterattacked, Japan would be too entrenched to dislodge. Then negotiate a peace that let Japan keep most of what they'd taken. This plan had a fatal flaw. It assumed America would negotiate. Japanese planners believed Americans were soft, that they'd lose the will to fight after a few defeats. They were catastrophically wrong. By mid-1942, it was clear America intended to fight until Japan surrendered unconditionally. No negotiation, no compromise. Total war until one side was completely defeated. This created a new strategic problem for Japan. They couldn't win a long war. America's industrial capacity was 10 times larger. America could build ships, planes, and weapons faster than Japan could destroy them. Every month, the balance shifted more toward America. Japan needed to change the strategic equation. They needed something so shocking, so devastating, that America would reconsider unconditional surrender. They needed to attack the American homeland directly. Most Japanese planners focused on defensive strategies: build fortified islands, make America pay in blood for every mile of ocean, hope they'd eventually negotiate. But a few officers thought bigger. If defense wouldn't work, maybe offense would. The idea was simple and terrifying: attack the American West Coast. Not with bombers that could drop a few bombs and leave, with an invasion force that could seize and hold territory. Make Americans feel vulnerable in their own country. Force them to divert resources from the Pacific offensive to homeland defense. It sounds insane. Japan invading California while simultaneously fighting across the Pacific? Impossible. Except the officers who developed the plan weren't idiots. They were some of Japan's best strategic minds, and they'd found a way to make it work. The initial concept for attacking the American West Coast emerged in 1942, right after the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. April 18, 1942. 16 B-25 bombers launched from the carrier USS Hornet and bombed Tokyo. The damage was minimal, but the psychological impact was massive. Japan's military leadership was humiliated. The home islands were supposed to be invulnerable. Now, American bombers had proven they weren't. Emperor Hirohito personally demanded retaliation. Japanese planners started looking at options for attacking the American mainland. The Aleutian Islands campaign was partly motivated by this: seize bases closer to America, eventually use them to attack the continental United States. But the real planning happened in the Naval General Staff. Captain Takushiro Hattori and Commander Minoru Genda started developing scenarios for attacking the American West Coast. Their first concept was submarine-based. Japan had the largest submarine fleet in the Pacific. Use submarines to shell coastal cities, land small raiding parties, create panic. This actually happened. Japanese submarines did shell California. The results were negligible. The second concept was more ambitious. Use submarine-launched aircraft to bomb American cities. Japan had several submarines equipped with hangars and catapults for float planes. Expand this concept. Build more. Conduct sustained bombing campaigns against Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles. This evolved into the I-400 class submarine program. Massive boats, the largest submarines built until nuclear vessels in the 1960s. Each one carried 3 aircraft. The plan was to build 18 of them and use the aircraft to bomb the Panama Canal, cutting American supply lines between the Atlantic and Pacific. But then, planners started thinking bigger. What if submarines weren't just for reconnaissance and bombing? What if they could transport troops? The idea seemed impossible at first. Submarines were cramped. You couldn't fit meaningful numbers of troops. But what if you built really big submarines? And what if you didn't need huge numbers of troops? What if a small, elite force landing in exactly the right place could accomplish the mission? By 1944, the concept had evolved. Don't try to invade and hold California long-term. That's impossible. Instead, conduct a surprise attack with a specific, achievable objective. Destroy critical infrastructure. Create panic. Force America to divert resources. Then withdraw before overwhelming force could respond. The target they selected was brilliant. Not Los Angeles or San Francisco, cities with military bases and defenses. Not Seattle with its naval yards. They chose San Diego. San Diego, in 1945, was one of the most important military installations in America, and it was almost completely undefended against the kind of attack Japan was planning. Naval Base San Diego was home to much of the Pacific Fleet. Aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, repair facilities, fuel storage, ammunition dumps. If you wanted to cripple American naval power in one strike, San Diego was the target. But the real prize was North Island Naval Air Station, one of the largest naval aviation facilities in the world. Hundreds of aircraft, training facilities, aircraft factories. Convair Aircraft was building B-24 bombers right there. Consolidated Aircraft was producing PBY Catalinas. If you destroyed North Island, you'd set back American naval aviation by months, maybe longer. Every carrier would lose its aircraft pipeline. Pilot training would be disrupted. Aircraft production would halt. Japanese planners identified San Diego's key vulnerabilities. First, it was a civilian city. Most of the population weren't military. There were relatively few army units nearby. The defenses were oriented toward protecting the harbor from enemy ships, not defending against an amphibious assault from unconventional directions. Second, the base was accessible from multiple beaches. You didn't need to assault the harbor directly. Land troops north or south of the base approach overland, hit the facilities from unexpected angles. Third, critical infrastructure was exposed. Fuel storage tanks sat above ground. Aircraft were parked on open airfields. Ammunition storage was accessible. Repair facilities had minimal protection. A relatively small force with demolition training could destroy massive amounts of equipment in a short time. Fourth, and this was key, San Diego was psychologically vulnerable. It was deep inside American territory. Californians felt safe. There were no real air raid preparations. No civil defense worth mentioning. An attack would create panic far beyond the actual military damage. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Land a force of 500 to 1,000 elite troops on beaches near San Diego. Use darkness and surprise to penetrate base defenses. Divide into teams with specific targets. Fuel storage, ammunition dumps, aircraft hangars, repair facilities, ship moorings. Spend 4 to 6 hours conducting systematic demolition. Then withdraw to the submarines and disappear. The beauty was that you didn't need to hold territory. You didn't need to fight American infantry. You just needed to get in, destroy everything possible, and get out before serious resistance arrived. A raid, not an invasion. But the scale of destruction would be enormous, and Japan had the perfect troops for the mission. The Special Naval Landing Forces, Japan's equivalent of Marines, trained for amphibious assault, experienced in demolition, disciplined enough to execute complex operations under pressure. These weren't random soldiers. They were elite commandos. The plan also leveraged Japan's submarine technology. The I-400 class could carry troops in addition to aircraft. Modified versions could transport even more. Surface at night, offload troops in motorized rafts, withdraw to wait offshore. After the raid, surface again, recover troops, submerge, and escape. American anti-submarine defenses in 1945 were formidable, but they were designed to stop submarines attacking convoys in open ocean, not submarines operating close to shore, surfacing briefly at night, then submerging and heading west at maximum speed. The escape route would take them through thousands of square miles of ocean where American forces would be searching. Planners estimated 70% chance of successful landing, 60% chance of successful demolition of primary targets, 40% chance of successful withdrawal. Those aren't great odds for the troops involved, but for the strategic payoff, they were acceptable. The plan got darker, much darker. Some Japanese planners weren't satisfied with conventional demolition. They wanted maximum psychological impact. They wanted to terrorize America so badly that public opinion would force negotiation. And they had a weapon that could do that, Unit 731. Most people know Unit 731 as Japan's biological warfare research facility in Manchuria. They conducted horrific experiments on prisoners: plague, anthrax, cholera, frostbite studies, vivisection, crimes against humanity that rivaled anything the Nazis did. What many don't know is that Unit 731 had an operational arm. They weren't just researching biological weapons, they were preparing to use them. In 1944, a faction within Japanese military command proposed modifying the California attack plan. Don't just destroy infrastructure. Use biological weapons against the civilian population. The weapon of choice was plague. Bubonic plague, specifically. Delivered via plague-infected fleas. Unit 731 had perfected the method in China. Breed millions of fleas. Infect them with plague bacteria. Load them into ceramic bombs. Drop the bombs over cities. The bombs shatter on impact. The fleas spread. People get bitten. Plague epidemic begins. The plan, named Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, called for using the I-400 submarines aircraft to drop plague bombs on San Diego. The timing was set for September 22nd, 1945, right before the planned invasion of Japan. The goal was to create a plague epidemic that would kill tens of thousands of civilians and force America to divert resources to epidemic control. This part of the plan was actually approved. In spring 1945, Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, commander of Unit 731, received orders to prepare 500 kilograms of plague-infested fleas for deployment against California. Production began. The fleas were being bred. The ceramic bombs were being manufactured. Why plague specifically? Several reasons. First, it's terrifying. Plague epidemics killed millions throughout history. Americans knew about plague. The psychological impact would be massive. Second, it spreads person to person. You don't need to infect everyone directly. Infect a few thousand, and the disease spreads on its own. Quarantine would be ineffective because authorities wouldn't know the cause initially. By the time they figured it out, the epidemic would be established. Third, it's hard to stop. Antibiotics existed in 1945, but not in quantities sufficient to treat a major outbreak. Hospitals would be overwhelmed. Panic would spread faster than the disease. Fourth, and this is the darkest part, it was deniable. Not completely, but enough. Japan could claim the outbreak was natural. Rats carrying plague existed in California. Without physical evidence of the attack, proving it was biological warfare would be difficult. The operational plan called for 5 I-400 class submarines. Each submarine carried 3 aircraft, 15 aircraft total. Each aircraft would drop multiple plague bombs over San Diego. The attack would happen at night. The aircraft would fly low to avoid radar, drop their payloads over densely populated areas, return to the submarines. The submarines would submerge and head west before dawn. Estimated casualties from the plague attack: 10,000 to 40,000 dead within the first month. Economic damage from quarantine and panic: incalculable. Strategic impact: America forced to dedicate massive resources to epidemic control and homeland defense instead of invading Japan. But the plan had a critical weakness: timing. Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night was scheduled for late September 1945. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The attack never happened. The plague fleas were destroyed. The submarines never left port. If Japan had executed this plan in 1944, when they still had operational submarines and control of the Pacific, the results could have been catastrophic. Separate from the biological warfare plan, Japanese planners continued developing the conventional invasion scenario. This plan was less well documented, but arguably more sophisticated. The conventional plan evolved through several iterations between 1943 and 1945. The final version, as reconstructed from captured documents and post-war interrogations, was remarkably detailed. The invasion force would consist of 5,000 troops divided into specialized units. Naval landing forces for the initial assault. Demolition experts for destroying infrastructure. Infantry to establish security perimeters. even paratroops to be dropped inland to disrupt American response. The transportation plan was the most ingenious part. Use a combination of submarines and fast surface ships. The submarines would carry advanced teams and heavy equipment. Fast destroyers and cruisers, running at night at maximum speed, would carry the main force. The route was carefully planned. Approach from the southwest, using the Guadalupe Island off Mexico as a staging point. Japanese submarines had used it before. From there, it's only 200 miles to San Diego. At 30 knots, a fast ship could make that run in under 7 hours. Launch the invasion force at night. The ships arrive off San Diego at 2 a.m. Troops offload into landing craft. Multiple landing sites north and south of the base. By 3 a.m., 5,000 troops are ashore and advancing on their objectives. The targets were prioritized. Primary objectives: fuel storage, aircraft facilities, ship repair docks. Secondary objectives: ammunition storage, communication centers, barracks. Tertiary objectives: civilian infrastructure like power plants and water treatment. Each objective had a dedicated team with specific orders. The fuel storage team had enough explosives to destroy millions of gallons of aviation fuel. The aircraft team planned to torch hundreds of planes on the airfield. The ship team would plant limpet mines on vessels in port. The timeline allowed 6 hours for demolition operations, from 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. By dawn, American forces would be responding, but in the confusion of night attack, coordinated defense would be difficult. By 9 a.m., the demolition teams would withdraw to their extraction points. The extraction plan was the weakest part. Getting out would be harder than getting in. American air power would be active by dawn. Naval units would be searching. The plan called for the surface ships to withdraw at maximum speed, while submarines provided cover and rescued any troops left behind. Expected casualties were brutal. Planners estimated 40 to 60% of the invasion force would be killed or captured. But the strategic payoff was worth it. If successful, the raid would destroy months of war production, sink dozens of ships, ground hundreds of aircraft, and most importantly, it would force America to fundamentally change its strategic posture. After a successful raid on San Diego, America would have to defend the entire West Coast. Troops that could be fighting in the Pacific would be stationed in California. Ships would be pulled from offensive operations for coastal patrol. Aircraft would be diverted to air defense. Resources would flow into homeland defense instead of invading Japan. Even the threat of another raid would accomplish this. Once Japan proved it could attack the American mainland, the psychological impact would force defensive preparation. The raid didn't need to be repeated. The first one would change everything. And here's the genius part. Japan wouldn't claim responsibility. Not immediately. Let America panic. Let them wonder if more attacks are coming. Let them waste resources preparing for threats that might not exist. The uncertainty would be as valuable as the actual damage. The scary truth is that if Japan had executed this plan in 1942 or 1943, it might have succeeded. In 1942, San Diego's defenses were minimal. Coastal artillery, yes. Naval patrols, yes. But defense against a determined amphibious raid? Barely. Most military resources were being shipped to the Pacific. The West Coast was being stripped to support offensive operations. A surprise attack would have faced weak opposition. Japan had the capability in 1942. Their submarine force was intact. Their surface fleet was powerful. The special naval landing forces were experienced and well-trained. The operational plan was sound. They had all the pieces. What they lacked was the will to execute. Japanese military culture emphasized conventional battles: carrier versus carrier, battleship versus battleship. A commando raid on civilian infrastructure wasn't honorable. It wasn't how the Imperial Navy saw itself fighting. By the time Japanese planners became desperate enough to consider unconventional operations, it was too late. Their submarine force was decimated, their surface fleet destroyed, their best troops dead. The capability was gone even though the plan remained. But imagine if they'd done it in early 1943, right after Guadalcanal, when American morale was still fragile, when the West Coast felt vulnerable, when America was just beginning its offensive. A successful raid destroying San Diego's naval facilities would have been devastating. Not militarily decisive. America would recover. But psychologically, the impact would be enormous. Pearl Harbor proved Japan could hurt America in Hawaii. A raid on California would prove nowhere was safe. The political pressure to defend the homeland would be irresistible. Military historians who've studied the plan admit it had merit. The operational concept was sound. The target selection was intelligent. The timing and execution were feasible with resources Japan possessed. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a real plan that could have worked. Why didn't Japan execute it? Several reasons. First, internal disagreement. Navy wanted submarines for commerce raiding. Army wanted resources for defending Pacific Islands. Nobody wanted to divert assets to a risky raid. Second, intelligence failures. Japanese planners overestimated American coastal defenses. They thought San Diego was more heavily defended than it was. Better intelligence might have shown the opportunity. Third, strategic inflexibility. Japanese war planning was rigid. Once the defensive strategy was set, changing it was difficult. By the time planners recognized the value of offensive operations against the American mainland, the organizational momentum was toward defense. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, the atomic bombs. The plan was still in development when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed. Japan surrendered before the plan could be executed. If the war had continued, if invasion of Japan had been necessary, this plan might have been Japan's last desperate gamble.